Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi here in Walterboro, day 21 of the Alec Murdaugh double murder trial. We are going to break into it here soon. Real quick, got to say a big thank you to Ginger and Sandy and Miss Magnus for your donations. I appreciate you guys. And Saturday, when I did day 20, after I got home, you know what I didn't do? I did not put in a music fact. And I was literally 2 minutes from finishing, and I was like, oh, well. So let's do our music fact of the day. What are the top 5 most covered songs of all time? Number 5, Over the Rainbow, Judy Garland. I have to say, my favorite version of that song is by Israel Caviola. I think I said that right. Probably said it wrong. Anyways, that is my favorite version with the ukulele. Number 4, My Way by Frank Sinatra. Number 3, Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Stones. Number 2, Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. Number 1, Yesterday by the Beatles. You know, I was listening to the Beatles coming down here, and they still say it sounds like they recorded it yesterday. Just good stuff. All right. So a little bit of news out of the gate. We had a juror who was sick this morning. So what happened? They were replaced with an alternate juror. That leaves 2, by my calculations. The defense expects to rest on Friday. Then we'll have rebuttal witness. I've heard that might not be a quick witness. Then, so we are getting on the back end of this. I think maybe, I don't know, next week. I just don't know if we'll have a verdict, but probably we'll at least get the closings, if not the start of deliberations next week at some point. Also, it was addressed before the jurors came in that Jim Griffin retweeted a Washington Post article. And the title, Alec Murdaugh trial reveals a sloppy investigation. Judge Newman was none too happy about this, and he asked if it was a defense strategy. And ultimately, Jim Griffin agreed not to tweet anything until after the trial. So how were the crowds today? A lot of people are asking. The line was long. Full house, both morning and afternoon. I suspect it's going to be that way for the rest of the trial, at least, until we start deliberating, and then we all will sit and wait. So, yeah. All right. So Buster took the stand today, guys. And we had heard that it might be tomorrow, but I could tell it might be today because he was a little nervous this morning. You could tell he was really biting his fingernails a lot. We've noticed when he gets uncomfortable or nervous, he bites his fingernails. And so he was kind of nonstop doing that. And I noticed he was dressed up a little more in a dark suit. And normally he wears like slip-on shoes, just kind of like brown leather shoes, but he had on like his Sunday best shoes. So I was like, he's going today. So he got up on the stand, and they just kind of do the way they do with the other witnesses, talk about his background. So he's 26. He likes sports, hunting, and fishing. And then they start talking about his dad. He said his dad coached every little league team that both he and Paul were on, and came to all their games. And if for some reason he couldn't come, he would always call and let them know why he couldn't be there. So they talk about buying Moselle, and he said they bought that back in 2012. And Hampton was their primary residence, but a hurricane came through, knocked some trees over on the house. And this was around the time that they bought Moselle. So they never really went back to that Hampton residence. At this point, Buster was in college, so he wasn't there a whole lot. But he would spend his weekends at Edisto at the beach house in the summers. He starts talking about Moselle. It's huge. It's 1,700 acres, and a lot of the property just isn't accessible. It's swampy. There's not a little road system. Some of it obviously does have roads, but for the most part, it sounds like a lot of it's just woods and swamps and stuff. So he talked about staying in the cabin with 2 of his friends, which were Nolan and Rogan, over the summer of his sophomore year of college. Remember, that little cabin is kind of near the kennels on the Moselle property. He said that they would hunt the hogs because the hogs would destroy the plots that they had planted to attract the deer and the birds to their property. Then he's asked about the types of guns they have at Moselle, and he names a bunch of different kinds off. They were mainly kept in the gun rooms, but at times they would leave them on the property mostly in the shed, on the golf cart, or in the cars. And he said some just wouldn't find their way back to the gun room. And of course, as we've heard before, Paul was the worst at leaving them around the property. So the blackout that we've been seeing in court is Buster's. Paul's blackout was black and tan, and we know that was stolen out of his car on Halloween at a party. But here's what I think is interesting. Buster said he never knew that Paul had a replacement blackout and he never saw it. So I think that's curious. You would think that maybe Paul would have said something to Buster if he got a replacement gun or would have at least seen it once or twice when they went out shooting. So where did that gun go? Kind of curious. Buster said when loading his shotgun, he would use a larger shell behind the smaller shell in the event he missed the first time. But he would never load buckshot with birdshot. And he said he doesn't know anyone who would. So he said they mostly used the main entrance with the brick pillars to go into Moselle. And Maggie would a lot of times go down to the kennel area to check the mail. That's where the mailbox is near the kennels. Or they would have any kind of packages delivered to that shed down there. So he said she would go check that often. So in spring of 2021, Buster was living near Rock Hill, South Carolina, and Paul was in Columbia at that time. After school ended, Paul actually went to live with John Marvin because he was working with him. Seems like those two were really close. So they spent a lot of time with Maggie's family as well as the Murdaugh family. But with Maggie's family, they would vacation together, go to Key West, Lake Kiowee, which is up near me. Beautiful lake, man. It's just it is the most beautiful lake I think in this entire state. Just you've got mountains or hills that just go into the water. It's just gorgeous. And he also talked about Alec and Maggie's dad being really, really close. They would go to sporting events, golf, do things together a lot. And just the same with the Murdaugh family. They spend a lot of time together at holidays and getting together and things like that. They ask about his grandpa Randolph. I said Rudolph, y'all. Randolph's nickname, and they called him Handsome, and that was a name given to him by his grandkids. So he talks about May of 2021. They knew that his health was failing and he had cancer. So Alec would frequently go check on both of his parents, and Buster would go sometimes too if he was there. Alec would go at lunch and evenings a lot, but he said he really didn't have a set schedule of when his dad would go check on his mom and dad. Maggie would go, but not on a regular basis. He said, though, Paul did. Paul would regularly go visit. When they would go to Miss Libby's, he talks about how they would park in a carport. And if they went later, they would pull around to the back of the house and go to the back door. He said it was quicker. So the photo here on the screen shows kind of where they park, which I think the reason that they brought this up is that tree line, the data that came in from GM showed that when Alec went to his mom's house the night of the murders, he kind of pulled around near a tree line. So I think that's the whole point of bringing this in, was to get that picture up and then to show that it is kind of backed up near those trees. Buster said the garage entrance, you usually have to knock. So they would have to call because most of the time the caregivers wouldn't hear the knock and they would have to be let in. So they show an overhead of Moselle an overhead of Alec's parents' house. They showed the back of the house and he pointed out the entrance and the bedroom in another picture that they show. It was right beside that back door. So typically it sounds like they would prefer to go in that back door. He points out where his grandpa would have cookouts once a month on the property. And so then they kind of switch back over to the family dynamics and relationships. And he said he talked to his parents a lot daily. And there was one call the day of the murders. He couldn't remember what it was about. So they go over some calls between him and Maggie, as well as text, which was pertaining to some medication for Buster that he needed to have sent to him. He said overall it was just a normal day, normal conversations. So when Alec called Buster after leaving Moselle after the murders, he said he was going to check on his mom, and Buster said his dad sounded normal. There wasn't anything suspicious, at least on the phone. He said cell phone coverage at Moselle, as we've heard, is bad. If you're under the shed, you get no service. And he said, as a whole, the property just everywhere, it's spotty service. And they had a new roof put on that house, which I believe he said was metal. And that made cell coverage even worse inside the residence. He said sometimes Alec would leave his phone I guess, wherever he was, if he was going out on the property sometimes as well. He said both Paul and Alec would misplace their phone at times too. Then they moved to his dad taking showers. And according to Buster, he showered a lot. If he got sweaty outside, he would come in and take a shower. When asked about the drug issues with his dad, he said he knew a little bit about it. He knew Paul and Maggie had found pills and confronted him over it. And I didn't know this, but I guess we're all learning as we go. But Alec went to detox in 2018 after Christmas, according to Buster. And Buster said he thought it was over, but they did find pills after that. He said at one point, Alec also did a self detox at home. So Buster really just wasn't at home when the confrontations about the pill usage took place. And his dad apparently would apologize every time. He said family disputes were handled in a civil nature. They'd talk it out, and there was no family violence. I think I heard him say he did get spanked as a kid. So Buster was living in Colombia at the time of the boat crash, and the reaction from the community and the media was very negative. And Paul was being bullied on social media and also while he was out and about, and people would want to talk about the boat crash with him. He said Maggie was consumed by all the drama surrounding the boat crash, and the negative comments about it really bothered her. So she distanced herself from Hampton just as a whole, didn't do normal daily stuff like grocery shop or go by the store or the pharmacy or anything like that. She just didn't do stuff there anymore because of how uncomfortable she was. So Buster acknowledges he was sued over that boat crash as well as Maggie's estate. And he said that she did worry about the lawsuit. Now, he couldn't remember if she was sued before she died or after. I don't know either. I'll have to find that out. But she was worried, as we've heard previously, about that lawsuit because she had read an article where Mark Tinsley said he was going to go after them for $40 million. And it made her really anxious. And Buster said, I don't have $40 million. And he said his dad didn't really seem overly anxious about the lawsuit for the boat crash, but he was because he was putting stuff in Maggie's name. So he was nervous. He said the family supported Paul and were going to support him through the criminal case because nobody thought Paul was actually driving the boat. So he talks about the birthday party for Alec at Edisto the weekend before the murders. He said it was just a normal, fun weekend. So they play that Memorial Day video where Paul's coming out carrying the cake. So Buster went to the University of South Carolina baseball tournament that weekend just before the murders with his folks. And he found out that his mom and his brother had been murdered from his dad, who called him and asked if he was sitting down. He said that his dad sounded odd on the phone before he told him about the murders. And he said his girlfriend, Brooklyn, could hear the conversation and she immediately started packing up things for them to go. So they live in Hilton Head, which if they were coming from Hilton Head, that's probably over an hour drive to get to Moselle from Hilton Head. Hilton Head's, about an hour, maybe a little more, a little less. But they arrived around 2 a.m. He said his dad was wearing shorts and a t-shirt when he got there. He said his dad's demeanor, he was destroyed, heartbroken, didn't talk much, cried a lot. They stayed at Moselle until around 4 or 5 in the morning, and then they went to Alameda, which is Miss Libby's house, with John Marvin, Alec, and Brooklyn. Buster said before they left Moselle, he packed his dad's clothes for him, and he got a shirt from the shelf in the closet. Now, remember, the housekeeper testified that there was a shirt laid on the floor that was folded that had fallen down. When asked if it's possible, if one of those shirts fell, Buster said he didn't know if one did or not, but it's possible. So they went back to Moselle the next morning and took showers. And he said he was with his dad pretty much daily for a good while. They stayed at John Marvin's hunting cabin for a week. They mentioned Randolph dying on the 10th, which was 3 days after the murders. They had funerals for Maggie and Paul. I'm assuming that following Saturday, and then Randolph's was the next day on that Sunday. So that Monday, they went to Somerville to stay with Maggie's parents for a few days. After that, they went to Lake Kiowee, which is probably 3 hours, maybe a little more away, with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. I believe it's Maggie's side of the family that has a place up at Kiowee. And then Buster went back to Rock Hill. They didn't have any security after the murders. Buster said, number one, he didn't want to carry around a gun or have somebody following him all the time. He said that his girlfriend's place had an alarm and cameras, and he was okay with that. So they talk about the reward that him and his dad offered up in the wake of the murders. So that they have him read the first two paragraphs, and it says, Alec and Buster Murdaugh announced $100,000 reward to bring justice for Maggie and Paul. It goes on to read, Alec and Buster Murdaugh announced today a reward of $100,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons who brutally murdered Paul and Maggie on June 7th, 2021. Then Alec is quoted as saying, I want to thank everyone for the incredible love and support that we have received over the last few weeks. Now is the time to bring justice for Maggie and Paul. Buster and I, along with Maggie's mother, father, and our entire family, ask that anyone with helpful information immediately call the SLED tip line or Crime Stoppers. So that was the release about the reward. And Buster didn't know why there was an expiration date of that award for September the 3rd of 2021. He talks about how his dad had clothes everywhere, Moselle, Edisto, just all over the place. And Buster said he never spent the night as well in Moselle after the murders took place. They show a picture from the Snapchat video, and he identifies the shirt, the blue shirt that Alec's wearing. He says it's not a Columbia shirt. And then he throws in that Alec doesn't wear a lot of Vineyard Vines. Remember, Blanca testified something about a Vineyard Vine brand shirt or something to that nature. So in August, Buster was playing in a golf tournament and Alec came to watch. So they have Buster listen to the clip of Alec being interviewed. And it's kind of that is the what do you hear? It's like they did him so bad. I did him so bad. So they play that clip and Buster says he heard they did him so bad. Buster said he did not know anything about his dad stealing money. He didn't know about the money that he owed Chris Wilson on Memorial Day weekend when they had that party either. He walks through how long it takes to clean the kennels, and it pretty much is about 10 minutes. So they show this photo while he's up there. So on cross, it was, I don't know, it was a little, I don't know if Buster wasn't hearing him. So the prosecutor's like, sorry about your mom and your brother and your grandpa, huh? And he like yells it, sorry about your mama, your brother, and your grandpa. This is one of those things where I think they had to tread very lightly. Number one, it's really obvious that the defense did not put that kennel video up. Number one, you don't want your son saying, yep, definitely my dad, because then it just opens it up for cross. Number two, it's been established 7 times that it's his dad's voice, but I'm sure the prosecution was like, play it, please play the video. So Buster is asked about the mailbox at the kennel, and he really just doesn't know why it's there. He's asked if you would be able to see at the kennels at night. And Buster said it just depends on which lights are turned on, but you could. And he's asked if it's close to get to the firm from Alameda, which is the grandparents' house. And he said 10 to 12 minute drive. And they have him point out where everyone parks at Alameda. He points out this driveway kind of to the side. He's asked how long ago he discussed this with defense, and he said just a couple of days ago. Our next partner is Athletic Greens. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens literally every day. I gave AG1 a try because I'm always busy and my diet isn't the best, but I still want to get all the vitamins my body needs without taking a ton of pills. I take AG1 in the morning before my first cup of coffee, and it makes me feel ready to take on my day. Why take a bunch of different things when you can just mix 1 scoop of powder and water once a day? It's the healthiest thing you can do in under a minute. With 1 scoop, I'm getting 75 vitamins and minerals that help my mood, energy levels, and healthier hair, skin, and nails. It's delivered to me every month, and it's been the easiest way to arm my body with everything it needs to tackle my day. If you're looking for an easier way to take supplements, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. That's athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. Check it out. And he was asked if he brought that to somebody's attention, and he says he didn't know. When asked if he'd ever been to his grandparents at 6:30 in the morning, he said yes, to hunt, and they would always call to tell them that they were coming. So they talk about Maggie loving Edisto, and she was having work done on the house when she was murdered, as we know. And Buster didn't know where Maggie planned to stay that night of the murders. So he just wasn't sure if she was going to go back to Edisto or stay at Moselle. Buster was last at Moselle in the spring before the murders, and he last talked to his brother Paul on the 5th, which was 2 days before, and as we know, talked to his mom the day of. He thought their finances were sound, and just they reiterate, you knew nothing about the financial crimes. He said he learned about it that day in September. I'm thinking maybe roadside shooting or yeah, it's kind of what I'm thinking. Or it could have been when he was arrested. I don't know. It did, if he clarified, I didn't hear it, but I don't think he specifically said which day. When asked about the boating accident that killed Mallory and if that put pressure on them, he said, I don't know if pressure is the right word with the civil charges. It was stressful. And he said, it seems like this is why Maggie, or he didn't say this, but it really just makes me think this is a lot of why Maggie wanted to be at Edisto, because we know she wasn't comfortable in Hampton. And so we know that she stayed there most of the time. As far as Alec's laundry, he said Blanca mainly would do his laundry, but sometimes Maggie would. And they bring up, if you watch the HBO Max series in the jail call, he asked Buster if he wants to go to Moselle to hunt deer. And Buster's like, no. And Alec kind of keeps going on and on. Well, I'm going to let Jim Griffin go if you don't want to go. And Buster's just clearly not interested. So they talk about that. And Buster just said he did not want to go. So after this was during break, this photo here, I'll put a link in the description for all you newbies. That way, if you're not watching on YouTube, you can see. But this was going to break on the right and then coming back from break on the left. On the right, you can see there he kind of gave Buster a little pat on his hip. Not sure if that's allowed, but he did. All right, so y'all, this next witness, this was interesting. So Mike Sutton, he's an acoustics engineer. So essentially, he determines if you can hear something based on other factors like background noise, what's in the way, trees, all that other stuff. And he says he works with external ballistics, which is tracking the bullet once it leaves the firearm, and the physics of the shooting, what happened during the shooting, what didn't happen, things like that. So defense attorney Harpootlian was up for direct. And this man went to Moselle 18 months after the murders, which was October of last year. So he measured the areas of interest and also looked at crime scene photos as well as evidence that was still on scene even in October of last year. He said he found a bullet hole in both the doghouse and a quail box or quail house. I don't know which you call it. But Mr. Sutton said you can tell where the shooter was by determining the angle of the trajectory. So he did these little graphs. And they also introduced a Faro scan of the crime scene, and the witness superimposed these two shooters on there. There's two here. I can't believe the defense let him get out there with two shooters in this picture at all, even if it is a hypothetical. So for the quail pin, he said it would be hard to shoot a 300 blackout from the shoulder since the hole in the quail pin is only 4 foot off the ground with an upward trajectory. So the barrel of that gun would have been less than 4 feet from the ground when fired, according to this witness. He thinks the shooter fired from the hip based on that trajectory. And he says a shorter person still couldn't get this angle even at shorter level. The doghouse had a 14-degree downward shot. So with the quail pin trajectory being, it's like a degree and a half in an upward angle, and the doghouse trajectory being 14 degrees downward, he thought the shooter was in the same spot for both shots. And the shooter would have been by Maggie's body, and where the shell casings were located backs this up. So on the visual, so here's where I'm confused, y'all. So you got this person shooting into this quail pin. So I'm wondering, Are they see, this is what I'm curious about. We know when Paul was shot first in the chest, Dr. Kinsey testified that Paul probably stood still for a second because he could tell due to the fact that these blood drops were round. There was no tail on them, which means that it was just dripping down. And he also explained you get those big drops like that. If somebody gets shot in the chest, like dead center, it's got to saturate the shirt before it drips on the floor. Well, he was wearing short sleeves. So once it passes the sleeve, goes down on the fingers, drips into a big fat circle on the ground. And then you think about he is slowly making his way to the door because, again, those drops stayed around. They didn't have a tail. So, in spite of the fact he's a very young man who was seemingly healthy, he was going slow because he was hurt. He had over 20 entry and exit wounds. And Dr. Kinsey testified the boy would have been in pain when he got shot that first time. So you think about it, that had to take a minute or two. Where's Maggie during all this? What did she hear? What did she see? Was she hiding? Because it looks to me like maybe where this pin is, that she could have been hiding. And it just breaks my heart to think, what did she see? Like, did she see her son like that as one of the last things that she sees on this earth? It's just, man, it is a hard thought. So on the visual here, he said the shooter is set at 5'2" because if the person were taller, the angle wouldn't work. Not to mention that puts the shooter away from Maggie and further away from those casings. So he measured Alec earlier today, by the way, and said that Alec has 25 inches between the ground and his kneecaps. So then he goes on to say, if Alec was the shooter, it would have had his trigger hand below the kneecaps, which Sutton calls an unrealistic shooting position. He said it would have you bent over with your trigger hand below your kneecap, and that makes it unlikely that a tall person was the shooter. I knew this testimony was coming. I knew it. So he said the likely height of the person who shot Maggie was between 5'2" and 5'4". So the defense mentions that Alec is 6'4", and the witness says, in his opinion, it's unlikely that Alec was the shooter. Now, I'm just going to tell you guys, having shooters that he estimates to be 5'2" to 5'4", I'm not trying to be funny, y'all, but the prosecutor kept saying a bunch of 12-year-olds did this, and we were all trying not to laugh out loud because it was stimulating the defense a little bit. The witness was getting really frustrated. They kind of had a sparring match when he was on cross, but or he would say two kids would do this. I swear, if he'd have said two Utes, for those of you that know my cousin Vinny, I'd have fell out. Y'all have seen me in the middle of the aisle because I'd have fell out my chair if he'd have said two Utes. So just before lunch, defense attorney Harpootlian asks if SLED did any trajectory analysis like what he's testifying about that he did. And he says not that he saw in the reports. So Harpootlian whips out Buster's blackout. And I'm going to tell you, he says, I'm not sure how to do this without pointing it at someone. Y'all, Rambo here had us in his sights as we sat in our seat. He looks a little too happy. There was a joke made. I need to read what it was, but I think it was objected to. I think he said something about don't tempt me being in front of the prosecutor. I don't know. But yeah, we were all in his line of fire at some point, y'all. So Sutton saw a defect in a tree behind the feed room, and he ran a string from the tree through the hole in the window in the feed room to the frame of the doorway of the feed room to figure out the upwards trajectory of the chest shot, that first shot to Paul. So he points out, the witness points out, he's 5'10", so he's similar height to Paul. He said if the gun had been fired from the shoulder area, it would have caused the trajectory to be downward. And it seems he's saying this is coming up from the hip again. That's kind of what I gather. So now on to the acoustic tests. He did this just last month on January the 5th. So when he's doing these acoustic tests, he has to consider the temperature and the humidity of when he's doing the test compared to the night of. The night of was June in the South and the Low Country. It was probably very humid and sticky. He shot into the feed room to mimic the real shooting, and that caused the sound to muffle. So the 300 blackout, he said, was much louder. Now they play an audio recording of the test fire from the 300 blackout. And most of us, or at least those around me, we didn't hear it. So he was recording that from inside the residence because they're obviously trying to say he could have been in the house and not heard those shots. He said, we were expecting it. And I guess some people did hear it, but barely. He said, if somebody's in the house with the TV on or even just walking around, they're not going to hear it. So this guy's like a combo meal in a witness. Okay. So he testified about 5 different things that were all on different planes, right? So he testifies about the trajectory, then the acoustics, and now we're going to jump to the General Motors data with speeds on the night of the murders. And he said Alec was speeding up gradually at the spot on Moselle Road where Maggie's phone was found the next day. So essentially, the point being made is that he didn't slow down at all to toss it. So he asked if Alec would have seen the bodies from the headlights of his car going to the kennels from the house, and he said yes. So they kind of go back to the tossing of Maggie's phone. He said if it were thrown from a moving car going 45 miles an hour, it would tumble. And they talk about Alec's speeds reaching 80 miles an hour that night. He's asked if that could be consistent with passing a slower moving car, and he said yes. The witness points out that the average speeds for the return trip was actually comparable to the going trip because those bursts of high speed were very brief. They weren't constant. So, cross-exam prosecutor Fernandez was up. And here is what he did, by the way, with the casings with that Faro scanner. He superimposed these evidence markers on this to show the location of where the casings were. So, I mean, Fernandez does not hold back. How much money are you getting for this? $350 an hour. He's worked 40 to 50 hours. So I got my calculator on my phone because y'all know me and math, we ain't friends. It's about $14,000 at least that he's been paid for what he did today. He was retained in September of last year, and his primary line of work is accident reconstruction. And he was also hired in the boat crash case by Jim Griffin. He never worked with Alec. He did work on the other opposing team in a railroad case. So the prosecution also asked, when did you finalize your PowerPoint? He said, yesterday. So the state points out he has no specialized training in firearms. He's not a member of any kind of professional organizations about firearms, no shooting reconstruction classes, no bullet trajectory certifications. He says he's done studies on bullet trajectories, but none have been published. So the witness says he isn't a pathologist nor a firearms expert. So the prosecutor says, so does that mean we can't trust any opinion of yours about firearms? And he's like, oh, no, that's not what I said. I can testify about the trajectory of bullets. So he has, y'all, I don't think I uploaded this, but he had a speed graph for the night of the murders. I don't have it. Okay, I'm just going to tell you. It's like a blue graph with a bunch of peaks and valleys and things like that. And this was, there were no times associated with it. It was just up and down lines, y'all. And so he pointed it out, but he can't recall what line associates with what time, such as when Maggie's phone was being tossed on the side of the road. He could not tell the prosecution which line represented that. So the witness wanted to get his laptop to see the times, but the state's kind of like, well, why don't we just stick to what you have? He did get his laptop out. I'm not sure if he pulled anything up or not, but the state points out as well, he didn't even use the same guns or ammunition that was used in the murders when doing his testing. So for the acoustics test that was done just last month, the state points out that the trees he took into consideration for muffling some of the sound of the shots, those trees have grown since the murders, almost 2 years. And then he says, are you aware that trees grow? And the witness was like, yes, I'm aware. He agrees the taller trees would have impacted the sound, but not in a big way. And he said he corrected his work to reflect that. When asked if he had any formal training with shotguns, he said he studied a lot and understands what happens to the pellets. So the prosecution's like, okay, well, let's talk about the spread of the shotgun pellets and how wide is the spread per yard. And the witness is like, I don't know. So the prosecution says, well, then how can you give your opinion? You don't even know the cone and the rate of expansion from a shotgun. It was tense, y'all. There was some back and forth. Both their faces pretty red, like little tomatoes sitting up there, both of them. When asked if he has done testing to determine what happens to a pellet once it goes through a body or a window, the witness says, I don't need to, because there was a pellet missing, and he found that missing pellet by the tree outside of the feed room. So the witness says that he was using the angle. Actually, that SLED concluded was the angle. It was Agent Worley. I believe it was his or her report. When asked if bullets can ricochet if it hits another object, the witness says, yeah, but it's unlikely here based on the evidence that was recovered at the crime scene. So for his bullet trajectory analysis, he used the markers for where the casings were located. And the state asks if it's possible they were ejected in an odd way. Could they have been moved, or could they have ricocheted? And the witness says yes. But all out through this, y'all, the prosecutors calling the figures or the 5'2" to 5'4" like children or kids. And oh my gosh, it was yeah. So the state points out that the witness didn't consider variables like was the shooter moving, was the victim moving, things like that. So on redirect, defense attorney Harpootlian says the information he used to make his conclusions came from SLED with nothing in their notes about a ricochet. He also said sound analysis wouldn't have changed even if you had put in the correct ammunition. Then Mr. Harpootlian has a paralegal or a member of his staff who is 5'3" stand up and said, she is not a child. So that was it today. There was some fireworks. I thought Buster's testimony was pretty benign. It wasn't anything that we didn't know about. Of course, it's all very controlled by the defense. You're not going to ask a lot of pointed questions that cross-exam would gobble up. So I thought it was mainly, I think, in my opinion, just to establish one thing, which is this parking area here. And then, is the tactic of introducing the pills with Buster to show that Alec was good at hiding his addiction, even to his own child, because Buster really kind of thought that had resolved. But as we know, just not long before the murders, maybe a month, Paul and Maggie both knew that he had pills in his computer bag. So I think it covered a little bit of ground as far as the parking and things like that. But to me, that seems to be the main reason they called him, was to verify that, because everything else was just kind of things we already know. So anyways, that was it for today. Don't know who's tomorrow. I need to find out. I'll do a little update in the morning. If you don't subscribe on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and hit the like button and the little bell. So if I do a YouTube short, it doesn't come on the main feed, I don't think. So that way you'll get a notification. I try to put something on there if I know who's up that morning or if anything interesting happens before I can get here to do an episode. So anyways, that's it for tonight, guys. I'm going to hit the sack. Hope you have a good one. See you tomorrow for day 22. Cross your fingers that we don't lose any more jurors between now and deliberations or even through deliberations. I just have a bad feeling when you have two people that are alternates and things happen, y'all. I would hate to be where we're saying the state's going to end their case on Friday and we are barely sliding in with two alternates. So let's just hope we get this thing overdone, deliberations going, and yeah. So, all right, guys, thanks for everything. You can catch me on Law and Crime tomorrow at breaks and then hour-long Q&A at lunch tomorrow. As usual, I'll be back tomorrow night to summarize everything for you in an hour or less. All right, have a good one.